Welcome back, friends and patrons. It's the Yvonne and David show, and I am welcoming back my friend and colleague, David Steele, of 13 years, and we are both accredited facilitators in compassionate communication with the Rocky Mountain Compassionate Communication Network. So today we're going to be discussing what is called a Warriors Impeccability. And this comes from the work of Carlos Castaneda. He spent 14 years as an apprentice with a Yaqui Indian sorcerer warrior who taught him the warrior teachings. And he wrote about them in his books. And so one of the things that Don Juan used to talk about was the warrior's impeccability. So I need to just explain really quickly what the word impeccability means in this case. It's not the way we normally think of it as being, morally impeccable. It didn't have anything to do with morality or anything like that. It had to do with storing energy. And what that means is that you needed to pay attention to when you were getting triggered. And Don Juan tried to help Castaneda to understand that it was not a bad thing to be around people or experiences that triggered you. In Fire from Within, he talked about what they called the petty tyrant, which is a person, and it can actually even be a situation. It can even be inside yourself. It can be anything that triggers you or stimulates a feeling in you that points to an unmet need. And so what Don Juan said was to welcome this, to welcome your triggers, to welcome your petty tyrants, and to let them help you to become impeccable. So again, it wasn't about repressing your feelings. It was about working with them in such a way that you actually learn how not to get triggered. It's very important to understand there's a big, big difference between healing your triggers and repressing them. And he was talking about healing your triggers. And when you do that, then you are able to store energy because you don't have what's called expensive emotions. So expensive emotions, as an example, is where someone says something or something happens or you read something and you get really upset. Like, let's just take a very simple example of someone cuts you off in traffic.
I believe they did that, those fucking idiots. Oh, I just said a bad word. Oh my God, I screwed up the video. I'm so sorry. Oh man, this is all going wrong.
Yeah, so here's a perfect example. We're going to use this as a demonstration. So in the case where you get cut off from traffic, you're suddenly, your whole body is like rushed with adrenaline and you're really angry. How could that person do that? And you're maybe cussing. Sometimes people even flip the bird, and then you get home and you got to tell someone about it. I couldn't believe this person cut me off in traffic. I was like swerving. They almost hit me. And you go on and on and on telling the story.
Oh, and then we could talk about the inadequacy of driving schools and the idiocy of people today, and how they don't take life seriously, and how they don't have consideration for others, and how they're trapped in their own little petty worlds. And so the world is going to hell in a handbasket because someone cut me off in traffic.
Yep. And so I'm sure many of you have probably even had situations like that in the past week. I know I have. In fact, that's what prompted me to want to do this video, because I noticed that I felt like I was getting this barrage of criticism and unwanted advice, and from all different sources, some very, very close to me, others, just strangers on YouTube that I don't even know. But just this barrage of criticism and unwanted advice that was really triggering me. And I was.
You just need to learn to not take it too seriously. Maybe if you like where to breathe and be like consistent and clear in what matters to you, and then if you just did that, then maybe you wouldn't get upset.
Well, that's advice we normally get, but it doesn't tend to Doesn't tend to help, does it, David?
Oh, I bet you didn't even want it. That advice I
Well,
just gave you.
I think what I really want to do is I want to explore how we actually deal with this stuff in an
Okay.
authentic way. And because one of the realizations that I had, I kept thinking, it's what we so often think. If I could just manipulate the externals, then everything would be okay. I wouldn't have these kind of people in my life criticizing me and giving me unwanted advice, but maybe I'm a little smarter than that. After all these years, I realized, I don't think I can make that go away. I can't manipulate the externals enough unless maybe I go live in a cave or something, but then there'll probably be bats in the cave and the bats will irritate me. So, I was realizing, okay, like there's a message here. I need to look at myself and see why I am getting triggered. Because that's expensive emotions. It's like, then you're angry and you're thinking about it, and it's running around in your head like a broken record. And, the hours go by and you're still thinking about it. That's what I call expensive emotions, because they drain you of energy and they don't really give anything back. And maybe you think you can, manipulate the externals, but see, this also relates to one of the original concepts that we were talking about, which is internal locus of control versus external locus of control. External locus of control is when the external has control of your mind and emotions, in the sense that, like, you're captivated by it, so somebody says or does something that irritates you, and all of a sudden, whoosh, you're locked in, and in the sense they now have control of your mind and emotions. They have your power. You have given your power away to them, because they are the ones now that are controlling your thoughts and feelings.
And
because
you can only hope that they
it.
use it wisely when you give them their power.
They usually
and you're at their mercy. I gave
Unfortunately.
you my power. Use it wisely. Don't abuse me, please.
Yeah, but usually it's not that way, is it? Usually when you give your power away to other people, you feel like crap and you're angry, you're irritated, maybe you're fearful. You keep thinking like a broken record over and over and over. If only they would do this, if only they would do that. I can't believe they did this. I can't believe they said that. And it's, like I said, it can drain hours of your life away. Depending on the situation, it can even drain days of your life away, maybe even weeks or years, who knows. But that's giving the power away to the external and thinking that we can somehow manipulate the external, and it actually doesn't work. And so then it reminded me, oh yeah, I have to go back to the internal locus of control, because that's the only place I really truly have any power, and work on my triggers. So I'm going to turn it over to you, David, because I know you know a lot about how to work with triggers.
What do you mean by that?
In a way that's really healing, because now, I think David's given his power away to me, because power can be not only, criticism, like you've given your power away because someone has criticized you and now you're upset, but actually it can work the other way too, with praise and flattery. And so, oh, you're so brilliant, David. I mean, you know everything. I'm just this, small little pea brain. I don't know anything, but you know everything. And that doesn't look like dominance. It doesn't look like I'm taking his power away, but actually that kind of thing, that kind of like overly saccharine, sweet praising and flattery is actually a form of manipulation. So
now I really feel pressure to perform after you said all that stuff about me.
yeah, so now David's given his power away to me, even though I pretended like I was the submissive one. And that I think is actually even more subtly powerful than the covert kind of domination that people try to have over people. But anyway, I really do want to turn it over to you and give you an opportunity. I want to share the power with you, David. I want to give you an opportunity to share what you know about triggers and how we can heal them, as opposed to repressing them, which doesn't do any good. So you have the ball.
Well, if you want to talk about impeccability in the Don Juanian sense of the word, I think you have to talk about self-importance. Self-importance is the opposite of impeccability. So in that cutting someone off in the traffic, self-importance is I'm what mattered and they were inconsiderate of me. Rather than wondering, I wonder if they were on their way to an emergency room, or maybe they just had a fight with their spouse and are really unsettled. No, it's they were inconsiderate of me. Mm-hmm. And so when we put ourselves at the center of the universe, which is a very human thing, we assumed the earth was the center of the universe astrologically, astronomically, for a long, long time. And when Galileo dared to say the earth was not the center of the universe, he was tortured and put under house arrest. And he, to save his life, recanted that assertion. And so when we put ourselves at the center of the universe, and people are doing this because it's me, because they're out to get me, because they're inconsiderate of me, that is self-importance. Mm-hmm. And when we are self-important, we're like Atlas in the Greek mythology that's holding the weight of the world on our shoulders. And we can't take a break because the world will shatter, the world will collapse. That takes a tremendous amount of energy. So we go into all of this pretense and contriving and posturing and posing. And then we have to remember what our image is, what we said before, how we should react, what other people are going to think about me, and how I got to act to get them to behave the way I want to, and all of this stuff. And that takes energy. Mm-hmm. So when you go into a state, as they would say in nonviolent communication, of observation, where there's no judgment, evaluation, analysis, diagnosis, you are noticing what is. And you're part of the picture, but you're part of the picture, you're not the star. But you have the gift of being present to experiencing it. Then you don't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. So that's impeccability. It's being aligned with your authentic self, your true self, without having to contrive, without having to pretend, so that you can just let who you are flow naturally out of your being. And there's so much, I'm just feeling some tenderness in this moment, because I'm thinking about social media and all the blaming and recrimination, and people telling each other how screwed up they are, and it just creates tremendous sadness, because we could get so caught up in that we destroy ourselves as a species. Mm-hmm. And so my mind took a little detour there, because there really is sadness in me around that, and around how we say things to each other that really are designed to stimulate and arouse in a way that's often angry. That oh my God reflex, and all of the energy that takes. So when we are secure in who we are, So you were talking about the unwanted advice you got earlier this week. Mm-hmm. When we are secure in who we are, when we are in touch with our core essence, which means we accept ourselves the way we are. We don't constantly tell ourselves about how we should be different than who we are. And we can't blame, we can't say it's other people's fault. When we are just core connected with who we are, then when people say stuff, we hear the need underneath what they're saying. And we don't get that amygdala brain stimulus response intensity, that fright, flight, freeze reaction that sends us off into pretense and posing. We can just be present to what is. And there's an amazing thing that happens when we're present to what is, and when we truly see the other person, they often calm down. And whatever it was that they were doing that was potentially upsetting to us, it runs out of steam. There's a Tai Chi, the fundamental principle of, one of the fundamental principles of Tai Chi is you meet activity with emptiness. If someone is coming at you, if you can move into stillness and simply be present and not engage that energy, it falls on its own momentum and you don't do anything. Because the stimulus, the triggering, in a way, it's other people trying to affirm that they exist. They're doing stuff to you to get attention or whatever it is to assert their own existence. When that does not meet resistance, when that falls into emptiness, then all of a sudden they can be disoriented and like not understand what's going on. And in that moment, there's a potential to envision to react in a brand new way that initiates a new pattern of connection and interaction. And Western language would use the word humility as impeccability. And I would say that we have a kind of a moral thing that makes you a good person. When Don Juan talked about impeccability, he just simply talked about it as if he was a physicist. Mm-hmm. Impeccability takes the minimum amount of energy. It brings us the most ease. Yeah. When we get caught up in blaming and pointing and having to fix the world and being offended by the way other people interact and stuff like that, it just takes a lot of freaking energy, and life is short. Yeah. And when we use that energy to be all upset and focused on how wrong this other person is, we can fall out of gratitude, lose touch with how precious life is and what a miracle it is to be alive. And then the next thing we know, we're 90 years old. And it's like, okay, it's the end. And what did I do with my life? So impeccability creates a richness of experience, an intensity of being, of living, that is incredibly joy-laden. And life becomes miraculous. So that's my pitch for impeccability. So you better be impeccable because then you become playful.
Well, I get all that because I've done a lot of inner work. And even though sometimes I forget and I do give my power away to people or circumstances external to me, I'm fairly quickly able to recognize what I'm doing and start to bring the power back inside where I actually have the power to change the situation by changing my own thoughts and feelings about it.
Marshall Rosenberg, since we're bringing in NVC to these calls sometimes, Marshall Rosenberg, his definition of I think what Don Juan meant with impeccability is never give anyone else the power to make you submit or rebel.
Yeah.
Don't interact with them in a way that you feel like you have to submit or rebel, because then they're controlling your action.
And so what I was saying is that, like, because I've done a lot of inner work, I can catch myself fairly quickly, come back to center, get grounded in my internal locus of control, where I know that I'm the one who gets to decide what I think, what I feel, how I respond. But I want to step into the shoes of someone who might be thinking or feeling like, if I don't speak up about this, like a lot of anger and fear, if I don't speak up about this, then I am condoning that behavior, and I cannot condone that behavior. So,
yes, standing up for yourself. I'm not going to put up with this BS.
Yeah, and it's not just standing up for yourself. Maybe you think you're standing up for what's right in the world, or you're standing up for other people who can't stand up for themselves. And, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we think that there is a delineation between one situation where I get triggered because the thing that triggers me most, there are two things that trigger me most often. One is when I think someone is speaking something that is untrue. Like I got triggered by a comment on my YouTube channel that said I was hiding out in a cabin while I told everyone else to stand up and fight for what's right. And I'm like, I'm not even in a cabin. I don't know what you're talking about, you know? Yes, we have a cabin in the mountains. I like to go there as a retreat. But in the summertime, because you can only be there in the summertime, it's incredibly rustic, doesn't even have running water, no internet, no phone, you know, no modern conveniences. I wasn't even at the cabin, but I certainly wasn't hiding out in the cabin while I was telling everyone else to fight. That's right. It really triggered me because it wasn't even accurate. So I do get triggered by things that I consider inaccurate information, or even lying, because you know I think that's what got me to talk a lot about Trump and his karma, was that I was triggered by the fact that he was speaking things that weren't actually true. And I think we need to kind of balance this, because if the anger is there and it feels like there's something that has to be said, I think we need to honor that, because it's really important to understand that this is not about repressing authenticity. It's about shifting the locus of power and shifting into impeccability. Because if we don't address that, I think there may be people who are listening to this video who will not understand what we are talking about. And I'll just say really quickly, the other thing that triggers me is people who think I can't take care of myself, which is usually my father. Even even at this stage in my life, my father still tells me, "You need to get a real job," and that can trigger me sometimes too. Which that one I can put aside pretty easily, but the last time he said that to me, still triggered me. So, but yeah, I want to talk about, you know, like, because I can't just brush off the fact that there are going to be some people who are saying, well, wait a minute, you know, like this situation is criminal. How can I not get triggered by this and speak out about it? You see what I'm saying? Because I think if we don't address that, we're skimming the surface.
So here's how I'd respond to that. It's about freedom and living consciously. As Henry David Thoreau said when he went to Walden Pond, I went to live in the woods to learn how to live deliberately and see what nature had to teach me. to me, that's a statement of impeccability, to live deliberately rather than be an automaton that simply responds to stimulus. So when you talk about an injustice, or like the stuff that has been happening, I just saw an interview with someone that was Me Too connected about how Black women are kind of at the bottom of the heap. For them, it's even harder to come forward because, as this woman that was in this interview said, there's also this attitude of Black people are oppressed. We have to keep this perfect image, not air or dirty laundry, because it just feeds the stereotype. So not only as a woman, if you have been sexually molested or whatever, as a woman, you're not supposed to speak out because it's the guy's prerogative, or it just causes waves, or it's what women are for, all those kinds of things. But as a Black person, you don't speak out either, because there's this pressure to maintain a certain facade about the perfection of Black people have to be squeaky clean or perfect. So that's a real life example of wanting to call attention to something that is, that the person was actually very upset about, and the courage it took to call attention to it. If she hadn't been core in her own strength and authenticity, she couldn't have said that. She would have felt the compulsion to remain silent. So it's her calling. She was somewhat of a public figure in the hip hop world. So she's someone pays attention to. And something arose in her that just would not allow her to maintain silence anymore. But since I'm talking about it in this context, when you think about Martin Luther King and what he accomplished in voting rights, which is a much bigger deal than many people, younger people, realize. People were killed for trying to vote. And to insist that Black people get to vote, people were killed. Martin Luther King didn't vilify anyone. He did not act in a triggered way where I can't believe this is going on. He was very much just calling attention from that witness point of view. This is what's happening. This is the impact it has. And then let the experience speak for itself. And so, in my opinion, when we are in a state of impeccability, it enables us to, and don't get so triggered, it enables us to look directly into the darkness without cowering. And without that, oh my God, this is so horrible, I can't take it kind of reaction. So I don't know if that directly addressed, you just took things in a turn that I wasn't expecting. So I hope I addressed your concern. I could say more, but I want to check in and see how that just resonated, what I just said.
Well, I guess the thing is that I think we have to turn the notch up a bit, because it's one thing for me, someone who has done a lot of inner work, to occasionally get triggered because my dad says, when are you going to get a real job? Or someone else told me I should just default on a credit card that I'm paying off because we're in the apocalypse, or on the verge of the apocalypse. That irritated me too. It was unwanted advice. Or someone criticizing me on YouTube for hiding out in a cabin, which I'm not even in a cabin, so it's not even true. Those are fairly minor things. And I have a lot of practice bringing my power back into myself and working with my own triggers, and just realizing that these are my petty tyrants to help me become an impeccable warrior. that's the relatively easy level. I'm talking about when someone feels outraged about a social injustice. And because I think there's a difference between taking responsibility, like I want to have an impact in the world, an impact for good, you know, something that I think demonstrates my values. We know someone who lived in Arvada who was like that, who was very committed to social justice, but literally went off the rails. Literally went off the rails. And you know, you might say lost her mind, because her identity was so tied up with the battle, with being at war.
You're describing many people on the planet.
Yeah, and that's giving your power away. That's not being a powerful defender of justice. That is giving your power away. And that's why I wanted to turn it up a notch and talk about, like, you know, if you see injustice in the world and you want to speak out about it, but you're speaking from a place of such rage and outrage and identification with this battle that you're fighting, and to the point where you lose touch, you give your power away because you're so lost in the story of fighting for justice that you've literally lost touch with your own grounded sense of self, and you're now you are now the war itself, and you have given your power away to that story of how you're fighting for justice. But you're not, because what you're doing is you've given your power away and you've become the war. And so, but that's a hard thing to teach people. That's way harder than teaching someone how not to get upset when your dad tells you to get a real job.
I do have stuff to say about that. And first of all, you're describing a lot of the ecosystem that travels through social media that's very toxic, and that creates a lot of divisiveness in the world today.
Yeah, and the mainstream media as well.
Conventional media as well. Social media is kind of like amped it up a level. And you can't teach a person something they don't want to learn. So if one of your core values, we talked about this in an earlier thing about responsibility, part of that is respect. If one of your core values is respect, then you treat everyone with respect. And so if someone is speaking very rapidly, very loudly, high-pitched voice, talking about what's wrong with a given situation, can you still treat them with respect?
But see, some people would say, no, I cannot treat Trump with respect.
Right. And then when that happens, then you're in the battle. If you can't treat them with respect, you're not being impeccable, because you're putting yourself in a position of judgment, and you've just stepped into the battle and feel a compulsion that they have to be different from who they are. And you're into that world of pretense and posing and trying to manipulate that outer world to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of what human beings are about. Okay. Serena Sargadatta, who was a very famous holy man in India. I believe he lived in Mumbai. People would go and ask him questions about the nature of reality. And someone came and they were talking about, we've got to stop war in the world. And Serena Sargadatta said, well, there are people a few hundred miles from here in Kashmir fighting. Go tell them to stop and see how well that works.
Mm.
And so the question is, do you get sucked into the battle or not? I talked about a few minutes ago about looking into the darkness, about when we're in our authentic self, we can see things and not turn away. And I talked about Martin Luther King and voting rights. And there's a dynamic that goes on sometimes when you call attention to something that's going on, like the war in Yemen, or criticizing Donald Trump, let's say. And there's a huge battle going on in this country around the energy that he is a part of. It doesn't emanate from him. He's not the cause of it, but he is certainly a very potent exemplar of it. I heard an interview with a guy named Mark Cuban, who's a billionaire, has been critical of Trump, some of Trump's things, but also is on his council of economic advisors. And the reporter asked him to grade Trump. And I just give him an A and move on. He's doing the best he can. He's doing what he knows how to do. And if he were to criticize Donald Trump, then all of a sudden the story would be, oh my God, you criticized Donald Trump. You're not on his side. And then when we get into that, we take our attention away from what's going on. I would much rather keep my attention on, make the story be about the events objectively. This is stuff that's happening, rather than, oh my God, look how you're reacting to what's happening. So this is not for most stuff, for most people, Yvonne. Most people are very attracted to the battle, the adrenaline rush from getting that I'm right and I'm on my cause, and the camaraderie of I'm working with other people. And, so let's say, you see a social injustice. From someone else's point of view, that might be restoring the natural order. That's not an injustice at all. That's righting a wrong. And so, for example, the go-to analogy is the Nazi ideology. So we talk a lot about Nazis. First of all, it grew out of Germany's defeat in World War I and the horrific conditions that the Germans were living in, and how they felt betrayed by their leaders. And they felt betrayed by other countries. That was a common meme that was circulating in Germany. And so Hitler came along and he said that we are divine beings, that we are descended from the Atlanteans, who once walked the earth and could do telekinesis, move things with their minds. That we are these very powerful magical beings. And then he went into that external locus of control. There is an energy out there that wants to destroy, because it's jealous of us. It wants to undermine what is our right. And the way it is going to undermine it is it is going to take us away from our heritage by polluting our bloodline with toxins. So these toxins are arriving in our bloodline in the form of these subhumans, these beasts that are disguised as humans so that we breed with them. So the purity of our heritage is poisoned, is polluted. So if we want to reclaim our rightful place and be returned to our divine inheritance, we need to purify, to cleanse ourselves. And in that case, in his case, that meant annihilating Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, because they were polluting the bloodline. But the compelling part of the argument that caught the masses was that, okay, this is a noble cause and we are righting an injustice. We are bringing about the natural order that was taken from us by people who were jealous of us. And so that was the mindset that you're not going to see in most history books. That was what gave, and it tapped into storylines, into mythologies, Norse mythology. He went deep into Norse mythology and pulled symbols that people were already used to as a culture, saying it's a continuing struggle that we people in Germany have been going on for centuries, and we're finally going to bring it to a fruition and destroy the enemy once and for all. So when you're living in a world where there's an enemy, you're going to feel compelled to destroy that enemy. And you talked about the petty tyrant at the beginning of this show. If you can look at the petty tyrant, if you look at the petty tyrant as your enemy, you're hooked. You're caught. They're controlling your behavior. When you can look at them as they're behaving this way and you see the needs under their behavior, then said this is about ease and freedom. Then when you don't get so triggered, there might be a rush of energy, but it doesn't manifest as fright, flight, freeze. And so you are more resourceful. So you see a broader picture. When we go into fright, flight, freeze, oh my God, isn't this awful? Our attention becomes very tunneled, very narrow, and our options become very limited. When we can see a larger context, when we can keep our brain calm, then maybe anger does arise. And, you know, Martin Luther King, there was a lot of anger in him. Gandhi, there was a lot of anger in him. But it didn't lash out personally to harm others. Gandhi talks about that anger becomes a fuel, it becomes an energy source like a nuclear reactor. He didn't use the phrase nuclear reactor, but it becomes an energy source that you can draw on so that you can persist day after day after day as you take concrete actions to bring about change. So the question is, it's easy and cheap to get outraged and see something on TV and say, isn't that horrible? Just like the person cutting you off in traffic, and then you yell and it goes in your mind and you talk to others and everything. Isn't that awful? And you're still sitting on your couch. It's another thing to see something and say, wow, that is really intense. I don't like that. What's the bigger picture? Okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go volunteer for an organization that's working on this. I'm going to go hang out with homeless people and see what it is that they need and actually take a concrete action to bring about the change that you want to see, rather than from the comfort of your chair, turn your imagination and run through scenarios and feel outrage.
Well, see, I think that a lot of people have this underlying assumption that's actually invisible, that when they are speaking out in that outraged voice, criticizing, you know, whether it be Trump or the Republicans, that they are
liberals,
actually,
the Democrats.
Yeah, whoever, that they are actually doing something.
Yeah,
You know,
well,
that speaking out against them, criticizing them, you know, I'm like, this is wrong, this is injustice, and I am going to tell you how wrong you are, you know, look at this, I have to speak out about this, that's actually doing something. And
yeah.
I wanted to also throw in another piece of the puzzle.
Before we move on to another piece of the puzzle, that's where they're at. Can you treat them with respect?
No,
because that's where they're at.
I know, but the thing is this: what we're trying to do is to help our patrons to see that when we do that, when we speak out with rage, that we have taken the position of superiority. And like you spent, you know, quite a few minutes talking about that mindset that the Nazis were in, of superiority, and how their sense of superiority, their self-importance, gave them the right to do what they did. And that's what I'm trying to help us to see, is that when we stand in that position of we are superior, we know what's right, we are right, we are outraged because we have a right to be outraged, because we know we're right and they are wrong, and it's so obvious, and so we have to speak out against them. And what I'm saying is, I'm trying to help people on my Patreon channel to see that when we do that, we're actually stepping into that mindset of superiority and self-importance, and that when we speak with that outrage, that we become the war and we create the war, and we're not actually doing anything. We're not becoming the imaginal selves that we talked about last week.
Okay. So I would say two things. So I can't enter into these conversations with an outcome, like I have to teach you anything, I have to get you to understand anything.
I know. See, David,
let me
that's another message that we'll have to do in another video, about letting go of outcome. I'm saying people are coming to my channel because they want to understand the ideas of the Warriors Impeccability.
Right.
I can't teach them if they don't want to hear it, but I'm trying to take it up to a new level of, you know, going beyond just getting triggered by my dad saying, you need to get a real job, taking up to the next level of how we can often get caught up in that story of outrage and how we're right and we're superior, and we need to manipulate the externals. So I think I understand what you're trying to say, is that I can't make anybody on my channel understand that. I get that. I've released outcome. I've released attachment to outcome. And at the same time, I know that people support me on my channel because they do want to understand this information. And I'm trying to share it in a way that I don't want to just sit back and say, well, I don't have any control over them, so I'm just gonna, you know, not talk about that. I know I don't have any control over them.
So I'd like to finish my sentence from earlier, which is that along with that attachment to outcome, I have enough trust in the teaching and the power of this teaching that to simply present it and then trust how it lands with other people, and the alchemizing that it does within them will just work in whatever way is appropriate for that person. But I don't know what is that appropriateness. I have no idea. Mm-hmm. So the people watching this video at some level are attracted to what we're doing, or they wouldn't be watching it. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing right now is a wonderful real life demo. We're not being academic, abstract, talking about out there. We're in the middle of it.
Right.
And so it's really important to me that this lands with people in whatever way is right for that person. And then I have enough trust in what we're doing that takes care of itself. And so, it took me years to really understand that, what you're talking about, stepping into the battle. I used to be very much into political activism. And I have a lot of empathy for and understanding about the importance of political activism, and bless the people that are drawn to it. And I used to be one of those armchair critics that thought I was doing something. And it's who I was, and bless me for being who I was back then, because it led me to who I am today. But it took years of study, of doing personal work, of learning how to observe what was going on and learning how to see my own behavior. Because when I was doing that, my own behavior was blind to me. So the way I would pose what you're talking about, this is a quick little story, and I think this is probably going to be our longest video ever, so I hope people are finding it engaging. There's some chemistry going on between us that I think might be captivating to folks. I went into my little neighborhood store one time, this was in 2012, and made a comment about the election in 2012, about the importance of voting. And the person at the store interpreted me as, you know, being a Romney supporter. And I didn't really have anything against Romney. I thought he was a pretty decent person. And that's really borne out today. He's a Republican that really, in my opinion, speaks truth to power in the Senate. But I said I thought he would make a competent president. And the person's face really lit up. And they told me how they had a Romney poster in their store. And then their neighbors, who were Obama supporters, said, how can you possibly support him? And they started boycotting her store. And she's a really decent human being. She was so kind to my mom when my mom was old. And she felt compelled to take down the Romney poster and put up an Obama's poster, just so she could keep her store in business. And she was so bitter. You know, she was so bitter about the fact that she couldn't be who she was. And to threaten someone's livelihood because who they support for president just creates more division and intolerance. So I take that story and then I look at, if you've seen footage of like Montgomery, Alabama and stuff, from the civil rights era, and people are walking down the street and they're surrounded by the crowds. And when the camera pans the crowds, there is so much anger and hatred on people's faces, and they're waving sticks and they're throwing rocks. And I look at those faces and I think about my friend who had the little store, and it's like, whatever cause it is that you support, the faces of the civil rights movement, you know, people who were walking, in contrast to all of the hatred and anger and stuff in the faces of the people surrounding, their faces are really calm, and I'm sure they're scared shitless, but their faces are calm, they're resolute, they're not really reacting and engaging. They're just going on in impeccable, steadfast pursuit of what their values are. So when we are engaged in a cause, and I don't care whether it's liberal, conservative, and I think of my friend at the store, and I'm just wondering, which face do we show the world? Do we show the face that the camera pans at the side of the road that's full of all of hatred and anger? Or are we showing the face of the people who are calmly, with resolution, moving in the direction that is congruent with their own being and their own resolve to bring into realization what it is that they care about. And so that's how I frame that question. And the face that you show to me is what's really going on. The cause is incidental. The question is, are you a soldier, since we talked about a battle, are you a soldier on behalf of anger and hatred? Or are you an emissary of love and compassion? And the rest is detail. But that's the fundamental question. So you brought us deep, Yvonne.
Yeah, I always think that like when we can actually demonstrate two human beings communicating with each other, that's way more powerful than all the theoretical stuff, you know? Like we're demonstrating two human beings in communication. That's more powerful than theorizing about how people communicate. You know what I mean?
I do,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Marshall McLuhan, or Mahatma Gandhi, Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. That's why Coca-Cola shows people jumping around having fun, because it has nothing to do with Coke. They want you to associate fun with Coke. And so it's the way we deliver, it's our affect, our demeanor, and the way we interact, more than the content that is the message. That's why Mahatma Gandhi says, become the change you seek in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the way I was experiencing it, I don't know how you were experiencing it, but the way I was experiencing it was that there was a need that I was longing to have met, which was for a shared reality and understanding. And I wasn't experiencing that. And so I was getting triggered in that moment because that need was not met. And you were, I
I
interpret.
went into judgment about what the video should be.
Oh, okay.
That fed your trigger.
Yeah, I didn't know exactly where you were coming from, but I kind of guessed that you were having a need to be able to express yourself fully before I spoke. And I was having a need for making sure that you understood what I was saying and we had a shared reality, because I was experiencing it as you were taking it in a different direction that didn't match. It didn't seem to coincide with that need being met for shared reality and understanding. And so I wanted to get the information out so that, like, hopefully before you start talking, we would have shared reality. We would have understanding. And then I was like, well, okay, so this is a perfect demonstration, you know, like I had a need that wanted to be met. And it felt really important in that moment. It felt more important than your need to be able to speak fully. And before I jumped in, and when I could see that, then I did feel myself calming down. And I realized that it was actually okay if we didn't have shared reality.
Right.
I let go of attachment to outcome. I let go of us needing to have shared reality.
That's great. Yeah, that's this is a perfect example, because when we touch into our authentic self and become clear on what our needs are, then we trust. So what I'm hearing is there was a lack of trust that what you wanted to convey would unfold if you didn't try to force it or insist on it. maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think the way you dissected it just now that we fed it back is really accurate. And I'm hoping this is a really great example for people how this works in action, because the fact of the matter is we were still both being authentic, even though there was some triggering going on. That trigger was authentic. Mm-hmm. And by connecting with the authenticity of that trigger, it led us into some pretty deep, and I hope for people, powerful conversation. Mm-hmm. You know, although it's also the kind of conversation that if someone doesn't want to hear it, they leave the channel, you know? Yeah. But for people who really want to hear it, it's like an oasis, maybe, of, you know, a fresh drink of water.
Yeah. I just come back to this feeling that the demonstration of two real authentic human beings having a real authentic conversation and real authentic triggering, and then working through it within ourselves. You know, I let go of attachment to outcome, meaning I let go of attachment to shared reality and trying to get you to understand and share the reality that I was experiencing in that moment. I let go of that because that would have been external. That was in a moment. I was triggered. I was in external locus of control. Like, I've got to make sure David understands me, that we have a shared reality before he starts talking. Then I just let go of that.
Right. Yes. And so what I did, rather than engage in battle about whose thing was more important, I just went into silence and listened. Mm-hmm. And because I didn't want to get into a domination dynamic. Yeah. But I didn't submit. Then when you had finished with what you were saying, then I came back to making, you know, saying what I wanted to say. Yeah. So it all worked out. And I think it was great. I love working with you.
Yeah. It also demonstrated that you didn't take it personally when I interrupted you. You didn't take it personally. Yeah.
Oh my God, how can she do that? We're supposed to be doing this show together. What have I gotten myself into? I promised Yvonne that I wouldn't do stuff like this silliness the first couple of videos. But if you're with us this long, I love to play. That's a part of it. Go ahead.
That's the other thing, is trusting that if people want to see this kind of authentic self-transformation and relationship building and communication, if they want to see that authenticity, like right in your face, you know, no prettying it up, then they're going to stick with us, and they're going to be like, okay, I see how that works, you know. Yeah. Because we've known each other for 13 years, and we don't hide who we really are with each other. We just say what we have to say, but we also work out our differences because we have a shared commitment. We have this commitment to shared reality, to relationship building, and to communication, and to respect. And, you know, and it goes back to what we were talking about before, about the microcosm and the macrocosm and the holographic consciousness that
in the previous video,
that you and I are our relationship, our communication is a microcosm of the macrocosm. So one of us could have been a Democrat, one of us a Republican, having an argument about who is right and who is wrong. You know, it doesn't matter. You can take it to any level, you know. And in fact, when you can work at the microcosmic level internally, then you become that imaginal cell to transform the whole. So we just demonstrated that.
Yeah, we did. So maybe this is a good ending point. I'll bet we're at 45 minutes on this recording.
Or even an hour, possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah. So again, I think, you know, people who really want this authentic teaching will stick around and appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to bring it to a close now, and I hope that all of you found that incredibly interesting. I mean, it was just the real thing. So, you know, so take it for what it is, and we'll talk about it in our next group Zoom session. Okay, so thanks again for joining us, and we appreciate you all, and thank you for being here. Bye-bye.